Thank you so very much, Chairman Cole. And, I think it is really important that we discuss what's really happening here and refocus on why we're here and how we got here. And I completely disagree with the idea that we're here because we have failed somehow to address a budget, because that is not why we're here. We are here because Republicans have sown chaos, calamity, and confusion ever since they took office in January. We took a week to elect a speaker. And now we're here because Republicans are holding Americans hostage by refusing to pay America's bills. And thank you so much, Ranking Member Boyle, for setting out what that actually means and does to our economy and does to our financial future. And we need to always remember, right? We've said it over and over again. I think it constantly merits saying over and over again. Republicans had no trouble increasing the debt by nearly $8 trillion under Trump. $8 trillion. And they voted 3 times to raise the debt ceiling. Let's contrast that with what happened under Biden in the first 2 years. We expect that first 2 years of his being in office, the deficit will be reduced by $1.4 trillion, because we need to remember that budgets are not just what do you spend money on. Budgets are also how do you raise revenue. And what we have been looking at is both raising the revenue needed to pay for the things America wants us to have, whether that's manufacturing in the United States. We hear over and over again about the importance of manufacturing in the United States. Well, guess what? Last Congress, we made something happen on that. We passed a bill so we could start manufacturing what we need in America. And then we passed the revenue provisions to make sure that we raise the revenue to pay for that. That is really what we did. Today, though, we have been forced into this precipice of financial ruin because of the Republicans' refusal to raise the debt limit. And they tossed the regular process out, as it was pointed out by our Republican witnesses today. They didn't go through the regular process of having hearings, of having a good discussion of what should or should not be included. Hostage. Instead, they chose hostages, and hostages are their words, right? Hostage is a word that we've talked about, but it is a word that Republicans have used when they've talked about negotiating around the debt limit. And the problem with paying ransom is that hostage takers tend to keep taking hostages, right? Normally, hostage taking is a criminal act. In this instance, it is an act against the American people. Ranking Member Boyle, your opening testimony in response to Representative Neguse highlighted the problem, right? And you took us back and talked about what happened in 2011, and you talked about how Standard & Poor downgraded our credit rating. You were very diplomatic. You didn't actually say who took us to that crisis, who refused to increase the debt ceiling at that time.
Yes, so in 2011, and this may sound familiar, there was a Democrat in the White House, and Republicans had just won control of the House of Representatives. And you can always tell when there's a Democrat in the White House because then Republicans suddenly are concerned about deficit and debt. When there's a Republican in the White House, concerns about the deficit and debt go away. As you pointed out, no single president in a 4-year period added more to the national debt than Donald Trump. $8 trillion in a 4-year period, and Republicans were in control of Congress during half of his presidency. But now, just 5 years later, with a Democrat in the White House and Republicans in control, we're seeing the same exact playbook that we saw in 2011.
And we see this over and over again, where Republicans claim fiscal responsibility but actually act incredibly irresponsible. Over and over again, Republicans increase the deficit, they increase it. It depends on what they choose, right? And as our ranking member pointed out, are you going to give more money than the military actually wants? Or are you going to invest in our communities and our people. Now, Standard & Poor's, they downgraded our credit rating. Have they raised that credit limit rating?
No, there are three credit agencies, Standard & Poor's, which was the one that downgraded us in 2011, never increased never reversed their downgrade. And frankly, my concern and the worry right now is that the other two credit agencies will now follow suit, given the events of the last couple months, which obviously look very much like 2011 all over again.
And so this kind of activity both has a negative impact immediately when we're in this moment of crisis and chaos that's been created by the Republicans, but there is this longer-term impact which you've been trying to explain to us. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly correct. And so, for many months, a lot of people were asking me, will we default, will we not default? And I attempted to point out exactly what you just said, that there is real damage even in coming close to the deadline, as we saw in 2011, and as I think we're seeing here right now. And that damage is not just limited to that time period, but we end up having to suffer from it for years to come.
So, Representative Thompson, you're nodding your head. Did you want to add something to this?
Well, I concur with what my colleague, the ranking member, said. We do run the risk of seeing our credit rating again dropped, which is going to be more expensive for the American people. There's a lot of discussion today about taxpayer dollars, the American people's dollars. We're going to be paying a lot more of those if we go through another round of credit downrating. One thing that hasn't really been talked about much is the other impact this gamesmanship has. And I'm certain that every one of us in this room who represents a congressional district has seen this over the last couple of months. We have unnecessarily worried veterans. Mm-hmm. We have unnecessarily worried seniors. We have unnecessarily worried anyone who is retired or about to retire and whose retirement is somehow attached to the stock market. We've embarrassed ourselves in the eyes of our allies and our adversaries, and this was all unnecessary. We could have done what we've done many times before, and as was pointed out by a number of members on the committee, what we did in the last administration. We could have paid our bills and moved on to negotiate these things that are so important / worrisome to all of us through the regular order of the budget process. The work requirements has been talked about a lot today. We're in the middle of the Farm Bill. That's where you deal with that. We already have work requirements. If you think they need to be amended, the Farm Bill is the place to do that, and that's what we should be doing, and we should quit causing alarm and unnecessary worry to the American people.
Thank you, Representative Thompson. And I think part of the worry was that the Republicans' Default on America Act, that actually did not protect seniors. It did not protect veterans. It did not protect the programs that America relies on, because it would have cut all of that. We saw that H.R. 2811 could have seen 22% cuts to food inspections, which would have cost our agricultural production $89 billion. We both have what you grow in your rural district is very different than what we grow in mine. I've got cattle, you've got wine, right? But it's like that would have been a big hit. It could have meant fewer air traffic controllers, so that those overburdened travelers would have had to wait even longer times. Go over and over again. There were so many things that were not protected in Republicans' 2811. That was their ransom. Their ransom was 2811, which we refer to as the Default on America Act. They added different words. But we asked them if they would protect veterans back then. We brought up amendments, Democrats did, I did, many of these, to say, if you believe that we should protect veterans, let's pass this amendment. Let's allow the amendment to be heard on the House floor, because my constituents were worried. And I asked our Republican witnesses, what would you say I should explain to my constituents about the fact that there could be drastic cuts in rural development, ranchers and farmers from the Farm Bill getting cut? And what they told me, the witnesses said, was, you should tell them that we have to prioritize. So let's talk about priorities. Republicans voted against every single one of those amendments. They would not let them be heard on the floor that would have protected rural development. They said, no, priority, that's not our priority. It's not rural America. We tried to put out amendments to protect rail safety because we had just had the crash in Palestine, food inspections, nutrition programs, so much more. And over again, Republicans rejected even hearing the amendments on the House floor. But you know who listened? Is veterans listened. We made sure that we went out and explained what their bill would have done to veterans. We made sure we went out and explained what it would have done to senior citizens, to Medicare, to Social Security. We made sure that the American people heard that over and over again. We went to our districts, and in our districts, they were worried. They were very worried, and that message got out. And what I am very glad about is that the White House listened, that those who were in the room negotiating from the Democratic perspective listened. And so the bill we have seen here today is not the drastic default on America bill. It's very different. And it's going to raise the debt limit. It's going to also give everybody peace of mind for at least 2 years. So while the Default on America bill would have slashed funding to the Indian Health Service potentially, H.R. 3746 allows advanced appropriations for the Indian Health Service to make sure that our health clinics can stay open if we don't pass a spending bill on time. And I will continue to work with Chair Cole. I'm very grateful for all the work he's done to make sure we have those advanced appropriations so we can actually make that permanent. The Default on America bill would have overturned clean energy tax credits and health care for veterans. We are not seeing that anymore in this bill. So while Democrats and President Biden have kept us from the worst, but Ranking Member Boyle, is H.R. 3746 the kind of bill that we could have negotiated through the appropriations process, budgeting process, in regular order?
Yes, absolutely. I mentioned I think I mentioned in my opening statement that if the X date in terms of by when the debt ceiling needed to be raised happened to be sometime next year, I feel very confident that this agreement, this bipartisan agreement that's before us, is probably what it would have looked like come August, September during the normal appropriations process as we worked to meet the midnight September 30th deadline. So this whole exercise in taking the economy hostage that the House majority Republicans have taken us down, in the end, was just entirely unnecessary.
Right. Thank you. And as I mentioned earlier, budget isn't just about the money you spend, it's also about the money you raise. Chairman Smith, would a corporate global minimum tax raise revenue for the United States?
A corporate global minimum tax. If you're talking about the corporate global minimum tax that this administration has entered into in Pillar 2 with OECD, that will in fact suck out $120 billion. And this administration made that agreement, which is bizarre to me.
We have seen that there are actually numbers that it would raise it, the same way that a minimum tax for billionaires would raise revenue. Closing tax loopholes that benefit hedge funds and private equity would raise revenue. Republicans have rejected over and over again proposals that would raise money from those who are the wealthiest and the biggest corporations. For some reason, they don't want to invest in working Americans, in families, in our seniors, in our veterans, and instead they're constantly protecting their billionaire buddies. So I just want to touch on one last thing. Chairman Smith, we've heard preliminarily that this bill might what is the estimated impact on deficit reduction from this bill?
I first want to respond. The global minimum tax that you just referred to, it is a fact That proposal would pull $120 billion out of our country from American workers and give it to 130 other nations. That is what the global minimum tax that this administration has entered into with the folks at OECD.
Well, you haven't answered. What do you think what is the expected deficit savings from this bill?
$2 trillion.
$2 trillion. It was mentioned earlier that the president had sent over a budget. Ranking member, can you tell us what that proposed budget would have done to the deficit?
I was proud that President Biden announced his official budget in my congressional district in Philadelphia. That included deficit reduction of over $3 trillion.
So let me get this. This bill that we have before us, they suggest it's going to be a $2 trillion deficit reduction. But the president submitted a budget that would have had a $3 trillion deficit. So once again, the Democrats' proposal is more fiscally responsive and invests in what Americans need, growing the economy from the bottom up and the middle out. I think with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for whatever questions he cares to pose to the panel.